Today we are pleased to feature the Honourable Mike Harcourt, a distinguished figure in British Columbia's political and civic landscape. Mr. Harcourt's political journey began as a city councillor in Vancouver in 1972 all the way until 1980, which was then followed by his tenureship as mayor of Vancouver from 1980 to 1986 under the Electoral's Action Movement, or better known as Team Party. He later served as Premier of British Columbia from 1991 to 1996 with the BC NDP. Throughout his career, Mike was instrumental in establishing Vancouver as one of the world's most livable cities and extending his vision to the provincial level, where he championed significant environmental protections and urban growth strategies. His career is marked by a deep commitment to urban planning, social justice, and sustainable development. Notably, his leadership saw the safeguarding of over 12% of the province's land, establishing 500 new protected areas, and the creation of the BC Treaty Commission. He remains a pivotal voice in supporting equitable community planning and development. Mike is an accomplished author. I've got his book right here. Contributing significantly to public discourse on sustainable urban development. Today, we're going to dive into housing and homelessness, economic policies and deficit spending, immigration and policy reform, and then finally, Mike's opinion on today's political leaders and reflections of his own career. Mike, welcome to Coastal Front. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome, of course. And I was saying just a little bit earlier, I was putting on my suit today and noticed I didn't have any orange suits in my closet, but I happen to have what looks like my NDP supporting
similar glasses.
You and I are wearing the exact same glasses.
Or when we go out with our kids or grandkids on Halloween.
On the Halloween colors.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to dive right into the whole concept about housing and homelessness. Now,
right.
There's a bill that many of us are familiar with, known as Bill 44, that David Eby has been moving forward, and it's considered a pretty monumental new housing initiative. And for those who are not familiar, this is basically mandating that municipalities with over 5,000 people in them across the province, the owners or developers of single-family lots will almost by default be allowed to be permitted to build three or four units on a lot, and in cases where those lots are zoned for high transit activity, they can build up to a 6-unit property on what's traditionally been a single-family home zoning. So, Mike, what is your opinion on this initiative?
Thumbs up.
You like it?
I like it. Okay. I've been trying to get rid of single-family zoning for 40 years or something like that, and it started when I had to deal with, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, with the whole illegal suite issue, and there were thousands of them in the city and providing really good rental housing and basements of homes and mortgage helpers for people trying to pay their mortgage on a new house. And so I've been supportive of using the land, the urban land, better. And 70% of the city of Vancouver is zoned single family, and so the change in zoning to allow better use of the land, either a house with a main suite and a basement suite, or a duplex in the front, and then 2 lane cottages or townhouses on the back, I think is a great use of land. And I think the idea that the province introduced, which is the kind of big, bold idea that British Columbians favor. Don't mess around picking away at something. Be big and bold and do it. And whether it was W.A.C. Bennett with his great vision, or others that have come along with terrific ideas. And so the idea of doing it right across the province, any community over 5,000, and allowing this better use of scarce land, I think is going to work.
Okay.
And
I'm sure David Eby will be happy to hear that he's got the endorsement of a former premier.
Well, and former mayor, and I told him already, good going.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. And I like the combination that it's not just that cities now have this opportunity to use land better, and people have the choice too. They don't have to have 3 or 4 units. If they've got the money to do a single family house or keep a single family house, they have that choice.
Sure.
So it's not being imposed on people.
Yeah.
And I think doing it right across the province, every city over 5,000 is going to allow it to happen without massively increasing the value and the assessments that people are going to face for their lots. So
okay.
I think it's a great idea. It's been well done, and it's going to provide I wouldn't say affordable housing for the poor and the homeless, but it's going to provide the kind of housing that people are going to have to get used to, which is multifamily.
Yeah, sure.
Single-family house in the cities is a 20th century dodo.
Yeah. It's from the past. Well, look, we're going to get into the homelessness and housing for them in a moment, but just to be devil's advocate, obviously this policy has come about as a result of failed municipal planning or allowing builders or small-scale builders or large-scale builders to get housing built. I mean, if you talk to any builder in Vancouver, it's been a mess. It's been they're talking for small apartment buildings in East Side Vancouver, upwards of 7 years from purchase of land to completion. It's nuts. So obviously David has been trying to address that through this initiative. But two comments that opponents of this would say. One would be that the province is overstepping their authority to municipalities, and municipalities should have the right to dictate what planning looks like. And then the second point that one would make is that this is going to homogenize and change the dynamics of many neighborhoods. You're going to have, I know there's people in Shaughnessy, for example, that are not happy about this, that might have a series of single family homes and they all kind of look nicely appointed and similar theme. Now all of a sudden you get a monster, almost mini apartment building built right in the middle of it, casting shadows on the next neighbor next door and impacting the urban environment in that more rural sort of semi-urban area. What are your thoughts on those 2 points?
Well, first of all, the province has jurisdiction over cities, under Section 92 of the Constitution. So they're not overstepping their authority at all. They have that authority. Right. And they're exercising it vigorously for a good cause, which is trying to get affordable housing built. Yeah. And that's surrounded with some other good policies. For example, that every municipality has to come up with a growth management plan, because we're growing 100,000 people a year in BC. So how are we going to accommodate that? How are we going to have the affordable housing and childcare, and how are we going to be able to provide the health services and build enough schools for the kids are going to be coming, and the libraries and the community services and parks. So they've said put that plan in place. Secondly, how are you going to accommodate the growth, and how are you going to deal with affordable housing? We want a housing plan, and they mandated to the end of June this year those 2 things to happen. And it said, oh, by the way, your processes stink at most cities in terms of the amount of time and the stress and the cost for developers to get approvals. You got to clean up your act. Yeah. And we hope you can do it with the implied choice that if you don't, we'll do it for you. And I think all that together is really essential if we're going to deal with the biggest issue we face, which is the lack of affordable housing, particularly for our own kids. Sure. Our kids.
I can see this in Vancouver, Mike. I'm just trying to look at the other side of this. Right. But you talked about this being a good policy for across the province. I grew up in Port Alberni, and I would argue that there probably isn't as much of an issue over affordable housing in Port Alberni as there is in Vancouver. Right. And so I kind of question, does it make sense that that now there's a new plan in place that allows someone to build a pretty monster style mini apartment building right next to a single family home that's going to, like I say, think about the shadowing effect of a big building next to a smaller building.
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think you're going to
No.
have a monster building.
Yeah.
You're going to have what looks like a single family house on the front part of the lot, which is a main suite
Yeah.
on the top floors, and then you'll have a basement suite, or you'll have two duplexes, or one duplex with 2 units on the front part of the lot. And then the back part, we've already started to allow laneway housing for rentals for people, and this is going to expand that to include maybe townhouses.
Right.
So you're really going to have the equivalent of a single-family house and 2 garages on the back part of the lot.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as creating this overshadowing and 3, 4, 5-story apartments, even though there are people advocating that. And I think that's too much.
Okay.
I think people are pushing the densification too far.
Yeah.
And the big worry I have is that Vancouver has worked really hard over many decades to establish that we're really not a city. We're a community of communities.
Yes.
And people in Vancouver don't say, well, I'm from Vancouver. They say, no, I'm from the West End or the Drive or Kitsilano or Marpole.
It's very true.
And
there's a high identification with the community you're living in.
Extremely high, and that's great because people have a sense of living in a smaller place and identifying with it. And we've quietly and systematically through many decades as councils and staff reinforced that by trying to make the strip shopping areas along the bus routes be viable, and then having community schools and community centers and branch libraries and neighborhood houses and seniors centers and a sense of, hey, this is all done for the people in the West End or Kitsilano or the Drive or Champlain Heights, and I'm worried that we're losing that by this mania of overdevelopment.
Okay.
Like there's a limit, and I think we've exceeded it. So I'm all for growth. I'm all for development, but managed properly and not overdone.
So it sounds to me like what you're in favor of is this model, because it doesn't have too significant density impact.
Right.
I mean, you can't, at the end of the day, even if you're in a high transit area, at the end of the day, you can only build 6 units. You can't build 8 or 10 or 22. By contrast, we're seeing a pretty big shift in the development of many neighborhoods where, it used to be, a handful of small apartment buildings or single family homes, and now you're having these 20 and 30-story high-rises. It's kind of interesting if you look at like Brentwood area. Have you ever been over by Brentwood and Burnaby?
It's just growing in leaps and bounds.
So is that an example of something you're concerned of happening in
No, I
Vancouver?
think Brentwood and Lougheed and Metrotown and Guildford are examples of a recycling of shopping centers, Park Royal. Recycling using the big, huge parking lots that surrounded the department stores and the other stores in the shopping center, using the land better.
Okay.
And so I think that's a really good trend.
Yeah.
And
it's a good use. It's like
a good use of the land.
It's almost revitalizing those areas by having people living there that didn't used to live there before.
That's right. And and a lot of them are right on transit.
Right.
So that people don't need cars, and they can walk to shop, and they can live, work, play in the neighborhood that they're in.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good idea, and the growth along the rapid transit, either the Canada line from Richmond, which is going ahead very quickly, or the extension of the Millennium Line from Commercial Drive or Clark Drive now out to Arbutus and hopefully to UBC.
Yeah.
To connect up to UBC.
It's got to go to UBC.
Which is just 100,000 people a day.
Yeah.
Either live there or go to school there or teach or our workers.
Yeah.
And so I think having the higher density along those rapid transit lines reinforces the rapid transit, and the transit reinforces people not having to have cars, or you thinking of using cars differently, like just when you need them.
Yeah.
And so you have, say, condos
Yeah.
or rental apartments having a community car.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you
The
can
car
use.
sharing programs.
Car sharing program.
Yeah. Sure.
Or people biking, or using some other means of transportation. So I think all those are good ideas, moving us in the right direction.
Yeah.
But let's not destroy the sense of communities that Vancouver has.
Well said. Yeah. Are there any other initiatives that either, as former mayor and former premier, that either our current mayor and current premier could be implementing? This is around the topic of housing. We'll get to homelessness next.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that you'd been advocating for in the past, or you'd like to see either the city or the province institute today? You're obviously in favor of this latest one by David Eby, but is there something else that you'd like to see implemented that hasn't happened yet?
Well, I think it's happening. I think Ken Sims is aggressively on to the idea of increasing supply.
Yeah.
And building a lot of housing more quickly, and has asked his excellent CAO, Paul Mokry,
Yeah.
and the planning staff, speed up approvals, and let's get going on housing and housing supply. So I think he's done a good job of that. And David Eby and the NDP government have probably the most activist and successful, although it doesn't, when you read the media and hear the critics, it doesn't sound like it, but they've had the most successful program of increasing supply, particularly of affordable housing.
Right.
So the real villain in this is the federal government.
Well, we're going to get to them for sure.
Because they, the Liberals of the 1990s did probably the dumbest public policy mistake in the last 50 years when they got rid of the nonprofit housing program in 1994.
Okay.
And that program was wildly successful from 1972 to 1992-4 in building 25,000 units a year across Canada. And in Vancouver, we were probably the most aggressive city government in the country. We welcomed that nonprofit program and built or worked with nonprofit providers and others to build 1,000, 2,000 units a year.
Really?
Of affordable
Is that
rental
right?
housing. So we built.
So was this under the Jean Chrétien era?
Yeah, that was Jean Chrétien. Paul Martin was the finance minister.
Uh-huh.
And as part of the getting rid of the deficit, they threw the baby out with the bathwater by getting rid of the nonprofit housing program.
Okay.
And so from 1994 till now, just the last year or two, when the federal government's, thank goodness, finally got back into affordable housing and the nonprofit part, we lost 25,000 units of affordable rental housing
In British Columbia.
across Canada.
Across Canada.
And we used to do 3,000 or 4,000 in British Columbia, and the province, helped finance that. Gordon Campbell, when he was premier, got rid of that and the rent supplement program that went along with the nonprofit program. But we're back in it now, and I think what we need to do is catch up. We've got probably 700,000 units that should have been built that have been built. 2 million Canadians could be living in affordable rental housing now.
Right.
So you wonder why we have a housing crisis.
Yeah.
That plus not providing services for the doubling of immigrants that the federal government introduced just a year or two ago.
Yeah, which we're going to get into as well.
Yeah.
Mike, to carry on with the topic of housing, I want to now switch to homelessness.
Sure.
And I know you're a big advocate of trying to solve for this, seems like, endless problem we have in the downtown east side. In fact, the homelessness and housing insecurity for those poor people down there is worse than I think we've ever seen. I don't know if you would agree or not.
No, it's more apparent because the good news is we actually have provided a lot of supportive housing for people that have a mental illness or addiction problem. And we've provided thousands of units of that kind of housing and housed thousands of homeless people in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of a society called Street to Home that the founder of Colliers International, John McEwen, put together. He's one of the founders of Colliers. You know, he founded Colliers.
Oh, he founded Colliers
when it was another company, and then merged with an Australian company and
Okay.
became the real estate giant across the world that it is now.
What was the name of the society there, Mike?
It called Street to Home.
Street to Home?
Yeah, we started in 2010
Okay.
as a response to Dave Eby's or to Gregor Robertson's mayor call to deal with homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And we formed up this society and focused on the homeless crisis then. Had over 2,000 people in the city who were homeless. And over the space of 8 years, we were able to, for the 5,000 homeless people that we ran into during that period, we were able to get 3,400 of them housed.
Is that right?
And the 1,600 that were remaining, 600 were in shelters that were low barrier, much safer, cleaner, provided a higher range of services, and there was 1,000 in that service situation.
Yeah.
And 600 on waiting lists for supportive housing that was
Right.
being built at the time.
Yeah.
So we actually broke the back of the homeless problem. And,
But this is in the early 2000s.
2010
Okay.
to 2018.
Yeah.
And I just got the latest count that we're down to 600 people homeless in the downtown east side.
Do you believe that those numbers are accurate?
I think they're accurate.
Have you driven down to the downtown east side
But
anytime?
that's the problem. It's who's on the street.
Uh-huh.
And who's on the
Okay.
street are 20% of the homeless or improperly housed, who are mentally ill, chronically addicted, and acting out.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are quite dangerous,
Yeah.
and they should be on the street.
Because
And
Mike,
that's
I
that's
haven't.
what's causing it.
Okay, because I haven't lived in Vancouver as long as you have, but it's not like I just showed up yesterday. I've been here for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
My grandfather, who's still with us today, thankfully, he just turned 100 this year. He was born in 1924 in a home on the corner of Fraser and 49th. And,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, fought in World War II and grew up in East Side Vancouver, went to John Oliver. And, you know, my grandmother, and we talked about this with former Mayor Sullivan.
Right.
My grandmother worked at the Royal Bank on Carroll and Hastings. And Mike, if you were to go down to the downtown east
Yeah.
side today, which I don't encourage you to do,
Mm-hmm.
it is not pleasant at all.
Well, that's because of the 300 people that we failed.
It seems like way more than 300 when I go down. I don't know the numbers, but it just seems
well,
like I've never seen
the tent
so many.
cities are Ken Sims is aggressively dismantling the tent cities.
Uh-huh.
But on the couple of blocks, the people aren't necessarily homeless. They're leaving their SROs because they're dangerous,
Okay.
or they don't have heat, or they've got a whole bunch of problems.
Yeah.
And some of the SROs have been taken over by gangs,
Mm-hmm.
and they're using them at distribution places.
Really?
So yeah, so
Wow.
it's a real problem area still.
I mean, Mike, you worked in Victoria, obviously.
Yeah.
If you go down Pandora Street
Terrible.
today, I mean, all my
Yeah.
family's over there. No one's ever seen this before.
No, it's a mess. But my point is that it can be solved,
Okay.
and the solution is the Building Community Society group that I'm also part of, that Milt Wong, who was a great entrepreneur and philanthropist in town, and wealth management guy.
Yeah.
He with Michael Clay.
So the dad was Milton Wong, I think, right?
That's Milton, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's got 3 daughters, lovely young women, and they Milton with Michael Clay, who was the director of the Carnegie Center for 10 years, put together Building Community Society, and I came along at the beginning and helped the idea of doing a long-term plan to transform the downtown east side into a safe, healthy, viable, mostly low-income community. And that plan was adopted in 2014 by the City Council, and it's 10 years in now. And of the $1 billion to fund it, $800 million was for housing, and that part of it is going well. But the part dealing with addiction and drugs and mental illness is where we're falling down. And the 300 that are 20% of the homeless, causing 80% of the aggravation on the street, and people feel threatened by, and who have done some terrible things, murdered, stabbed some people, and clubbed others, and they're in the middle of a paranoid episode or a schizophrenic meltdown, and they shouldn't be on the street. And it's going to take a while to clean it up.
So what would be your solution? I mean, there used to be institutions like the Riverview.
Yeah.
I mean, would you endorse the reopening of those types of institutions?
Well, they've done that. They've got a new sort of institute built on the Riverview grounds, actually, that is focused on First Nations, culturally sensitive treatment.
Yeah.
But people are off the street in there getting treatment, getting culturally sensitive treatment, and 40% at least of the homeless, the people I'm talking about, the 300 people that are on everybody's list.
Yeah. So
we've got facilities like that starting to happen,
Uh-huh.
and the province is building 19 of them around. They're building all facilities like that around the province.
Yeah.
That are specifically dealing with addiction and mental illness.
Yeah.
So it's coming, but it's coming too slowly,
Mm-hmm.
and people are still noticing because they feel threatened,
Yeah.
and some people have been harmed,
Yeah.
killed.
And never mind the fact that it's, I mean, just visually, it's such a huge stain on our city when you drive down through there. We had some friends come from Mexico, and they were walking around. They got kind of lost, and they walked through there, and they were just quite disturbed. I mean, these people are from Mexico City.
It is disturbing.
Yeah.
The
Mike, I have a question for you.
But in 2 years, it'll be gone. Within 2 years.
Based on what?
Based on the amount that's underway now. Based on what Ken Sims has done, which is hard-edged policing, tearing down the street encampments, dealing with the issue in Crab Park.
But where are these people going? I mean, it doesn't happen without finding them.
They're finding places for them to go. The BC Housing and the city, and there's street workers. There's people relocating.
I mean, BC Housing's been through its own mess here recently with its leadership.
Well, and Dave Eby came in and cleaned it up.
Yeah. And you're pretty confident that they're on the right track to get this?
They're on the right track, and they have immense amounts of money.
Yeah, they do, that's for sure.
They have big budgets, and that's being reinforced by many billions from the federal government now.
Yeah.
And so I think within the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to really start to feel an easing of the housing crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mike,
but housing takes a while, as you know, to get going. You got to get the land, you got to get the approvals, you got to get financing, then you got to get a tender for construction contract, and then you got to build it, and that takes a while. But a lot of that has already been done, and the first wave has occurred. And I was amazed when I read the speeches from in this session of the legislature, when the Minister of Housing, Ravi Kahlon, said that the province would set a target in 2018 under John Horgan of building 114,000 units of affordable rental housing from 2018 to 2028.
Yeah.
And to my surprise and delight, Ravi announced that they've actually done 78,000 already.
They've already
have been built or are underway.
Over half.
Well,
Yeah,
almost two-thirds.
Like the 60, 70%.
Yeah. So, and they preserved 36,000.
Yeah.
By dealing with Airbnb.
Yeah.
And dealing with empty homes, and they've got a bunch of stuff that I think will beat the 10-year target, and probably the most aggressive housing program in the country. There's no other province that's even close. So I'm confident, but I've got the kind of government perspective that is a little different than the business guy that wants to, and rightly so.
Yeah.
Wants to get profitable quickly and stay profitable and get stuff done. Sometimes the mill of the gods grinds slowly in government. It takes a while.
Sure does.
Yeah.
So, Mike, when you look at this housing file and you seem quite confident that these are going to get resolved, I guess one of my questions I would ask you is, under your government and previous governments to that and following after yours, there was never a sort of safe supply concept, and now that's well embedded.
Right.
And yet, we're 7 to 10 years of what's called safe supply in the downtown east side, and the situation's far worse than it's ever been. Are you in favor of the safe supply concept?
Well, if it's part of the four pillars approach that Philip Owen, to his credit,
do you believe that
pioneered,
four pillars approach? Do you believe in that concept?
I think you have to do enforcement, education, treatment, and prevention. You've got to do all four.
And so if you believe in that four pillars approach, which
Yeah.
most of us are familiar with, and it's quite, I think, a quite well thought out concept. But it's not working. So either the four
pillars, it's not working because of
either four pillars isn't working, or it's not being implemented entirely.
No, I think it's because of the terrible impact of fentanyl. The fentanyl crisis is a disaster, and what it's done is it's created an exhausted crew of people try to run the nonprofit housing societies, the people in the emergency wards, the first responders.
But then arguably this four pillars concept doesn't work under a certain drug type, effectively, is what you're saying.
I'm saying that it's part of a solution, and what's missing is the treatment. What's missing is dealing with the people I'm talking about, the 300 hardest to house, mentally ill, chronically addicted, and that's just
hardest to house. That's a nice. I like that statement. It's a good description.
They don't. Some of them don't want to go indoors.
Right.
Some of the people living in Stanley Park, or Jericho, or the University of Endowment lands, they just want to be left alone.
Right.
I don't want to be in any institution. I don't want to be indoors. I want to be on my own. They're like urban hermits, They have that. But if you don't have the treatment to go along with the enforcement, and which is starting to have an impact. I mean, the police have been making some huge arrests of people involved in the drug trade and the stolen car problem, and particularly in Ontario. So the enforcement is starting to get more effective. The education is happening. There's a lot of really good education programs of the stupidity and the tragedy of addiction, of people knowing that the drugs they're buying are laced with fentanyl and could kill them. They're still using them. I mean, it's astonishing, but that's even with all the education, if you don't have the treatment so
that's the key of the four pillars that you think is missing today.
Missing.
Okay. when I've had Sam Sullivan on previously,
Yeah.
of course, he's a resident of Yaletown. He's made that public, and he talked about the Howard Johnson Hotel that the provincial government acquired.
Right.
One of many hotels. There's been hotels in Victoria and Kamloops that have been purchased by the provincial government. Some of them are still not housing people, but this one is, and it's housing a lot of people who were previously in the homeless environment. But these people don't have any what they call wraparound services, and so I mean, Yaletown today is really a mess compared to where it was a decade ago.
It is, and it deserves it deserves better treatment, and it deserves the kind of programs that I'm talking about.
Okay.
And as I said, those are the 300 people aren't a large number, but they're causing massive amounts of disruption to individuals and to communities like Yaletown. And
is there anyone in particular that's really leading the charge in this thing that you'd like to acknowledge that you think is really helping and addressing these hardest to home?
Well, I think the city councils and the provincial government have been, all of them have been trying to address the issue, and whether it's Dave Eby or Kevin Falcon, you know, they understand what needs to be done, differ a bit, and there's a bit of politics being played now about, as you say, it's not working.
Yeah.
But it's not working because we haven't seen the impact yet of the treatment programs that we're talking about that need to be aggressively followed, and that's just starting to happen. And I was listening to, for example, Cross Country Checkup, and the mayor of Mayor Krogh from Nanaimo, Leonard Krogh was on, and he was saying, you know, help. This is every day when I'm out and about shopping or on the street, people come up and say, you got to fix it. It's dangerous out there for me and my kids, and so the mayors have a committee all over the province.
Okay.
On to the province about it, and the province is responding with, as I said, an aggressive providing of services. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, $400 million was put into mental health. For the first time it's had that kind of a budget. And part of that are the kind of services we're talking about.
Right. Well, let's hope it improves. It's been a problem not only here in Vancouver and Nanaimo, Victoria.
All over.
But it's all, all across the west coast of North America, if not other parts. But you know what's fascinating, Mike?
Yeah.
My wife and I just came back from a week in Tokyo. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Japan or not.
I have many times.
So you've been to Tokyo.
Yeah.
What an amazing city. I mean, there's, this is a city of 13 million people.
Oh, 20 million plus.
20 million?
Yeah, they're in the whole area.
In the whole area.
Yeah.
And, the streets are clean. There's no homelessness.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to think that they've got their fair share of people with mental health issues and as well. But there's something they're doing right that we're missing out on. So maybe there's some other factors that I haven't considered.
Well, the other factor is that their population is shrinking dramatically.
That's true. Yeah.
And they have an aging population.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, they have a crisis in their housing market of too many empty homes.
Right.
I mean, we should be so lucky.
Yeah.
In Canada. But Japan is just a well-run country.
Yeah, it sure is. Some lessons to be learned.
We're laboring to get there, but it's relative. You compare the Vancouver scene, which, as you and I have just discussed, is bad and needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And the 2,000 plus people that we have in the region who are homeless. If you go to Seattle, it's like 11,000.
Yeah, it's really. I mean, Oregon.
It's a disaster. If you
Portland,
Portland, same thing.
San Francisco.
30,000.
Yeah, right.
And Los Angeles is 70,000 that they know about.
Yeah.
And probably more. It's out of control.
It is.
And so our problems are resolvable. Their problems are almost not fixable now. Like LA, I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just a monster there.
It is. Yeah.
As I said, within 3 years, I think we're going to have a fix taking place in the greater Vancouver area.
Well, let's hope you're right. We can sit down 3 years
We'll
from
sit
now.
down 3 years from now and say, Harcourt, you were right, or Harcourt, the prediction was
It's probably
wrong.
not the first time you've had it that happen. Okay, Mike, let's switch topics to economic policies and deficit spending. Now, under your watch as Premier, the BC government, under the BC NDP, ran up deficits as other governments have done in the past.
Yeah.
But today's provincial government, and especially federal government, we
Yeah.
are seeing deficits like we've never seen before. And I'm not even talking about the unbelievable numbers that happened during COVID. But
Right.
it's almost like COVID gave us this window
Yeah.
to run up. So my first question to you is like, is this even possibly sustainable?
No, we have to fix it.
Okay.
I think
Let's start maybe talk about your own years and
Well, I actually, ironically, I'm sort of from the Western social democrat tradition of pragmatic governments running the show and being very fiscally prudent. Tommy Douglas, for 17 years, worked on getting Saskatchewan's economic and financial situation sorted out. He got rid of the deficit that was left by the previous Liberal government in Saskatchewan in the 30s and 40s. And he waited and built up the finances in Saskatchewan before he even introduced Medicare, that they felt they could afford it now. And the same with the New Democrat governments in Manitoba and following governments of Ellen Blakeney and Roy Romano in Saskatchewan. Roy, for example, inherited a $13 billion deficit in Saskatchewan. The province was ready to go bankrupt, and he had to put on the brakes to get rid of it. He did.
So what happened for you when you
Well,
came
I
in
got in.
1991
I inherited a deficit. Matter of
from
fact,
Bill Vanderzam?
For Bill Vanderzam.
How big was your deficit coming into
the big deficit? Well, we were told before the election in 1991
Yeah.
by Vanderzam had resigned by then in disgrace, and Rita Johnson was the
Acting.
was the premier
Right.
who won the nomination over Grace McCarthy in June of 1991 and became premier. And she and her finance minister said that, well, the deficit's $400 million. When we got in and had the books examined independently by an independent accounting firm, it actually was $2.4 billion. And
2.4 billion.
within 16 months was going to be $4.5 billion.
In 6 to 8 months.
16 months.
In 16 months.
It was going to be double that. And so I had to do what you have to do, which is cut expenditures and the rate of spending and increase taxes.
Right.
So for every $2 we chopped in expectations and expenditures, we raised $1 in taxes through a temporary capital gains tax. It was very unpopular, and we got rid of it after we'd paid off the deficit the first time. And then Paul Martin came in, and in getting rid of the federal deficit, he dumped $7 billion of the federal deficit back on the provinces by cutting funding to health, education, and social services.
So we inherited a second deficit.
Inherited a second deficit, and then started on that, and then I got out, and Glenn Clark took over, and eventually they got rid of that deficit too. So, I have come from a tradition of fiscal prudence in public life, and I really believe in it. Matter of fact, if you're on a city council, the legislation is pretty clear that if you run a deficit as a mayor or council member, you're personally liable for it.
That's
now
fantastic.
that's a good incentive.
That is. Well, maybe we should have the same policy provincially and federally.
Well, it would certainly stiffen the spines about spending. But I think at a certain point you have to watch losing your credit. We were in 1993-4 because the previous Liberal Conservative governments had not reined in the spending. We were facing a $38 billion deficit, and going to be declared a banana republic by the world's financial markets. So I think Paul Martin, grabbing a hold of that was a good idea.
Yeah.
But
well, you bring up a good point here, Mike. One of my questions, maybe you were reading ahead of them, but I did speak to David about my concern. This is probably in February of 2023.
Right.
About we'd already seen a downgrade of British Columbia's credit rating by the few of the different credit rating agencies.
One of them, yeah.
Yeah, but
The
we've
one
had
gave a
multiple
heads up.
since. So now we've effectively lost the majority of our AAA credit. I mean, BC was the only province left with a AAA credit rating. We still have one, I believe it's S&P or
right, and they'll get it back in a couple of years.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you do your math on this. It takes by my own research.
Yeah.
It takes on average a provincial government, if you go back over the last 30 years, it takes on average 14 years to recover your.
Yeah.
So
I don't think so. I think our problem is growth.
Don't you think that's a concern though, that we continue?
I think it's a big concern.
I mean, this is the world I live in every day.
Yeah. No, listen. I think it's a big
and it's
concern.
costing taxpayers by my numbers. We've seen the cost of borrowing because we compare ourselves to the province of Ontario debts, like the bond rates that they're paying.
Right.
And we've seen about a 3 to 4 basis point increase. Now, for the average person's bank account, that means nothing. But when you're talking about an $8 billion, public debt file, I mean that's costing us somewhere north of $20 to $30 million a year of added interest costs, and that's nothing to do with raising interest rates. It's just like the downgrade.
Well, that's $30 billion on a budget of $80 billion.
That's just right now.
No, but I'm saying that's the. But let's keep it in perspective. I mean, it's doable. It's not something we should be doing necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's doable, and I think the problem is growth. We've got 100,000 people a year coming. You got to keep building schools. You got to keep building healthcare facilities. You got to keep providing affordable housing, childcare, post-secondary training. But
all these credit rating agencies have all been saying BC's on negative watch for a lot of them now.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm just asking you as someone who's been through this before,
right?
Trying to balance between building infrastructure and institutions like you've just described, Mike, but also knowing that the public markets they kind of ultimately
They're
decide.
Saying heads up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think. My guess is, and it's only a hunch, we'll deal with it next time we talk, that the so-called $7 billion deficit that was projected in this year's budget, by the fall will be gone. Because if you look at the overestimating of expenditures and the underestimating of revenues that's in that budget, if you look at the number of contingency accounts, the number of sinking fund accounts, I think that by the time the election's called in September, it'll be gone.
Right.
And I think,
well, I mean, David did, when I spoke to him, he did say that he believes that they actually can't spend everything they're estimating that they would spend on.
That's my point.
He actually said it's largely actually a labor issue. They actually don't have enough people to spend the money.
And that's why they're putting a lot of money into trades training,
right,
and technology training and that. So I listen. I think I'm a fiscally prudent person. And have had to get rid of deficits, so I know how painful that is.
It's not an easy task.
And I think we have to do it, and are going to do it.
What about at the federal level?
What I'm worried about at the federal government.
That's what your concern is?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these federal deficits are like nothing we've ever seen before.
Well, they're much bigger than the last time we faced it, and I think it's going to be an issue over the next year and a half before the next federal election.
Yeah.
And I think the Canadian public are starting to say, hey, this is a problem. We think it needs to be dealt with. What are you going to do? So I'm gonna watch very carefully what Prime Minister Trudeau and Poilievre, the leader of the opposition, what they say specifically they're going to do to address the deficit. So I think it's going to be an election issue.
Yeah.
It should be, along with some of the other issues that have been raised about immigration. I think most Canadians think immigration is good because we're all immigrants, basically.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's let's dive in. That's a great segue.
Sure.
So, the influx of international workers and students have been coming into this country.
Over a million.
Over a million last year.
Yeah.
In 2023.
Yeah.
And just to give those listeners and viewers who might not be that familiar, give some context of what we'd seen previous to that.
Well, the number of immigrants used to be about 250,000 a year, and we doubled that to 500,000. The number of students and foreign workers used to be half the amount of, I think it was over 700,000 last year. And doing that doubling of immigrants and foreign workers and students without taking into account where they're going to live,
right,
and where they're going to get their health services, and if they got kids, where they're going to go to school, is irresponsible. And it's that's what should be the issue, not immigration. And I think that's going to be a really an important election issue for people to talk about and to come up with solutions.
Mm-hmm. Well, the federal government has responded to this by limiting how many foreign students are now coming into the country.
Yeah.
Mike, on a sort of a very sort of personal level, my wife and I were looking to hire a house cleaner for our home because, ironically, we had a lady from Argentina who was doing great work for us, but she was a student here. And she completed her studies in technology, and now she's looking for work in that space. So we put a posting out on one of these job posting sites, and the number of students we had applying were insane. I mean, what's interesting, they almost all, like 1 out of every 5 were from Bhutan, which I found very interesting. Like, I don't know what's going on, because Bhutan has less than 800,000 people. I've been there, actually. I went there for my honeymoon. And they were all going to Canada West University. That's just very perplexing. But my sense was there's a lot of these students, and these are not wealthy students coming from wealthy families abroad.
Right. They need the work.
They need the work. Like they're coming here paying, going to some unknown university, paying probably very high tuition fees. I don't know how much money Canada West University is making off of this. It's probably quite a good racket. Versus students you meet who come from wealthy families, they go to UBC and they pay like 4 times the tuition fee, and it's effectively buying their kids a path to permanent residency and citizenship.
Got it.
But I thought, wow, these young kids coming from these mostly emerging market nations, coming to Canada, going to these unknown colleges and universities, looking for work, all saying that they want to work more than 20 hours a week, which is what their work permits allow them. And I thought, these people are probably not being recorded by Stats Canada as being unemployed because they're considered to be students. And I almost wonder if maybe like the unemployment rate is actually a lot higher in this country than it really is, because you've got all these foreign students who, they're going to school 2 days a week, but they need to work the rest of them. And these people are willing to work for a lot of them are like, oh, I'll work for $15 an hour cash just to have a job.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't do that, but like it's
it's
concerning.
I hear what you're saying, because a matter of fact, I just left our place in Kitsilano, and we've got a wonderful husband-wife team from Indonesia who are helping clean our house today. So, without people from other countries coming in to do that kind of work and run the 7-Elevens and
Yeah, it's not a question of whether we need them. I think the question comes down to like how many of these people before it becomes
too much
for everybody.
Well,
I mean,
it's
for them
much.
themselves, I feel really bad for these people. I feel like they were kind of sold a story.
They were sold a bill of goods.
A bill of goods.
Well, we should be regulating a lot tighter the private universities like that, because I think some of them are quite legitimate, do a good job. Some of them are scam artists, and they're ripping these people off. And some of the immigrant consultants are doing the same thing. Most of them aren't. Most of them do a good job of greasing the wheel to get people able to come into the country. But it's a big concern that we've got all these people coming that exacerbating an already housing crisis problem.
So if you were to advise I mean, this is obviously a federal file. This is
Right.
not controlled by the municipal or provincial government. You know, what advice would you give to the federal government today?
Back off.
But give me some more tangible.
Back
like,
off.
You go back to half a
Back
million,
off
quarter
to
million,
250,000, 300,000. Provide the resources for housing and all the other services these people are going to require, and do it as quickly as possible, because you're overloading the system.
Yeah.
And not only that, you're harming the goodwill of Canadians who appreciate the fact that one of our successful aspects of Canada is that we welcome immigration.
Yeah.
And we're one of only 5 countries in the world that has an explicit immigration policy.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, it's only Canada, the U.S., Britain, Australia, New Zealand who have articulated immigration policies and processes and resources in place. Other countries just have people come, and some of them be there for decades. Like in Germany, the number of people from Turkey is generations, or the people from the French colonies, and it's creating a real problem now, because they haven't assimilated into their society the way we do here. You know, I call it the 3-generation cycle. The first generation of immigrants come, and a lot of them sacrifice, and they can't practice their profession or their trade because they can't get licensed.
Yeah.
So
that's the old joke, is that if you're going to have a heart attack, have it in a taxi in New York City, because probably the driver's a heart surgeon or a doctor.
Heart surgeon, yeah. Well, any event, they come and make sure their kids get a good education and opportunities. That second generation are very studious and work very hard at that. And the third generation become Canadian kids and played street hockey, eh?
Yeah.
And so, it's 3 generations, and we've been doing that for, 150 years now.
Yeah. Well said. Well, let's hope that we can get some more sort of common sense amongst the on the immigration.
That's a
file.
good word. It's common sense.
Yeah. Well, Pierre Poilievre's using that one a lot right now. Yeah, seems to be working for him. Okay, I want to go into the last 2 conversations around reflections on your career, and then I want to ask you about some individual political leaders today and get your opinion on them. So the first, I would like you to go back to your days of being a city councillor in the mid-late 70s, and then eventually mayor of Vancouver. And the simple question is, Mike, when you look back to your days of being mayor, is there, or even on city council, is there any 1 or 2 things that you did that you look back and go, wow, we really got that one right? And then equally, is there anything you look back on and go, well, if I could change that one, that one I'm not so proud of. That's the one that, hopefully they write it in small print on the history books.
Well, what I'm proudest of is the team view of the city, the Electors' Action Movement.
Yeah.
That people from all the political parties teamed up and put together a different vision than the typical vision of the city at that time, which was a 9 to 5 downtown, working business downtown, that closed down at night, and people got in their car on a freeway and out to their suburban home.
Yeah. And this was a new party that you guys created, right?
We created a new party of people of like minds, and the intellectual genius behind it, the livable city concept, was an urban geographer by the name of Walter Hardwick.
Okay.
Who was on the faculty at UBC, and one of the most renowned urban geographers in the world. And he had a vision of a livable city that was quite different than the vision of the 9 to 5 downtown and urban renewal, to fix the slums.
Yeah.
So-called slums.
The slums, okay.
And that livable city idea of having a city that's has a downtown that's alive 16 hours of the day. People live, work, play in the downtown, or around activity areas like on Broadway, Central Broadway, and communities are reinforced that people really can live, work, play in those communities.
Mm-hmm.
And that then formed a vision of the city that we introduced very quickly and changed the city very rapidly. We in the first 3 weeks, we fired the city manager, who had been overseeing, Gerald Sutton Brown, who had been overseeing the urban renewal of Vancouver, and basically a tame council that followed his every order, the NPA council at the time. And we got rid of 5 of the 15 city department heads.
Wow.
And introduced zero-based budgeting, program management, and really whipped the city hall into shape and opened up the city so that citizens had a role and could participate in coming before council or engaged in planning the future of their communities. We had
so none of that really existed before?
No.
Really?
No, it was just
Wow.
it was
something
all,
kind of taken for granted today.
Yeah, it was all new. And we need to renew it. We need to renew that commitment to citizen engagement. And we need staff and council that are good at it.
Yeah.
And it's skills that's being lost that we need to reintroduce.
Yeah.
And so we did a huge number of those kinds of changes, and brought out a very activist Parks Board agenda, because we had 9 of the 11 seats on council, and ran the Parks Board and the school board, and had platforms for all 3, for the city council, for school and parks.
Mm-hmm.
And the parks was to really introduce a whole bunch of recreational facilities, like the Britannia Center.
Yeah.
And like the pool at by
Lord Byng, or?
Yeah, some of the pools throughout the city.
Yeah.
And more tennis courts and more activities for people to enjoy.
Yeah.
And so that was a really enjoyable period in the 70s when we did all that. We introduced some great planning of big areas that could be redeveloped, like False Creek South,
Yeah.
and Granville Island, and Champlain Heights.
Yeah.
And we did social engineering in both. We said we want to have a mix of people, rich, medium income, poor. We want to have a mix of family types of, families with kids, and people that are couples without kids, and single, and we plan that into both Champlain Heights and south side of False Creek.
Okay.
And produced 2, still very attractive communities. And Granville Island with the help of the leadership, Ron Bassford, who was the MP, Liberal MP at that time, acquired Granville Island. And we had two plans that we looked at. One was tear all the buildings down and turn it into playing fields, which half the council wanted. And then half the council, and I was a deciding vote, said, no, we like this young architect, Norm Hodson's view, which is let's keep all the old buildings and keep that sense of the industrial history and reuse them, recycle them as a farmer's market and restaurants. And
this was under your tenureship as mayor?
No, it was when Art Phillips was the mayor, and Jack Ballrich and me, and I inherited it in 1980. And its problem now is it's too successful.
Yeah,
it's too crowded.
I know. We were down at Granville Island last 2 weekends ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know, how do they deal with the parking now?
Well, that's the problem. There's
people everywhere. It's quite exciting, but it's
it's just a huge asset for the city.
Yeah.
So
those are some great wins, Mike.
Yeah.
Now let's look at your critical self and say, okay, as mayor, what was something that you got wrong when you look back?
Oh, it was minor stuff where I just verbally goofed. Like one time when Harry Rankin attacked right before dinner, and you had to watch Harry because his blood sugar, when it got too low, he became very cranky, and I agree.
And for context, Harry Rankin was
one of the council members.
Okay.
He was a communist, very left, very outspoken criminal trial lawyer, who ran 11 times like John Diefenbaker did before he finally got elected in the 60s, along with Art Phillips and Walter Hardwick. They were the opposition, along with Bob Williams, who also got elected for a while in the 60s. And Harry was, we reached an agreement that when the people came forward that were trying to raise money for the Science Center, that they were going to say they were inviting Henry Kissinger, that Harry wouldn't turn it into a ideological harangue.
Really?
Yeah, I said, Harry, let's just let them come, have their say, break for dinner, and then we'll come back, after dinner for a session. And they did their presentation. Harry then got up and started to attack Kissinger for Vietnam and for a whole bunch of other sins that he was accusing Kissinger of. And I just got so frustrated that I said something that sounded like I was being critical of Kissinger, and I was basically to try to be critical of Harry. And so that came out as a headline that Harcourt criticizes Henry Kissinger, and I had to say the next day, okay, I goofed, I misspoke, and then
that's one for the record books, though.
Oh well, that's misspeaking in politics is a problem, because once you've said it, it's gone.
Yeah. Especially in today's world. I mean, it's got to be so tough for these people, right?
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
A matter of fact, the good thing is that I was in politics before the internet and before social media. So
yeah.
It was it was hard fought, and BC politics is a bit of a bare knuckle brawl.
Yeah.
And Vancouver politics is pretty hard edged.
Yeah.
But we didn't have that mass of angry, bilious, anonymous cowards attacking you, and attacking your family and threatening you.
I mean, it's really bad.
Bad stuff.
Yeah. Mike, before we jump to your reflections as premier, let me ask you one more question about mayor, and you mentioned earlier the Parks Board. Under Ken Sim and the current ABC party, they're going to disband the Park Board.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Parks Board served a really good purpose for a number of years. As a matter of fact, one of the big bold ideas in Vancouver was in 1886 when the city was incorporated.
Yeah.
And the new city council, after they incorporated themselves, the first motion was to ask the federal government for a naval reserve that they wanted to turn into Stanley Park. Which
Really?
is very, that's a statement on Vancouver's people having vision and looking ahead to the long term. And
thank goodness they did that, huh?
yeah, so I think
it's a real jewel of our city.
It's nothing like it in the world.
No.
And so that was a really valuable, and I think acquiring land for parks over many decades, and land banking it, sort of not using the parks for recreational facilities. That was the goal of the Parks Board for many, many decades, and they did a good job of doing that, and building a few community centers like where I grew up in Marpole, where Jack Diamond, matter of fact, and the Diamond family financed the first community center in the city at 59th, I think, and or 57th, and in Oak Park there, and Oak. But I found that when in the 70s and 80s, I found the Parks Board became a single issue advocate of just give us more money, just give us a blank check. Here's our budget, which is way over what we could afford, and our job as council is to make sure there's enough funding for police, fire, engineering services, for the libraries, for running the city and collecting taxes and managing the planning, and I found the Parks Board we became the heavies, saying no, we're not going to give you $60 million for parks. Here's the budget, and we can only give you $40 million, and then we get attacked as council for being skinflints, right? And not we want to spend all kinds of money on parks and facilities. Well, you can't. It's just like we talked about, dealing with the deficits.
Yeah.
You got to control your spending.
That's for sure you do.
And particularly, as I told you earlier, when the legislation has you personally liable for any deficit. So, we had to do our job, and we did. And so I've always been ambivalent about the elected Parks Board versus a appointed commission, which every other city in Canada has, and in the U.S. So I'm not really upset.
Mm-hmm.
By
you're not in favor.
Ken's
You're not
end.
against it. It's a path that let Ken and his party decide what to do. And
I think it'll work.
Yeah.
You look at the Burnaby and the other cities around here that have really good appointed parks commissions and excellent park and recreation services.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to be a huge challenge for the city to turn it into a commission.
Okay. It's great.
Like the library board. Appointed.
Good point.
They run a great system.
Yeah. Okay, now let's switch to your years of premier. Was it a 4-year period, roughly?
Yeah, 4.5 almost.
4.5, 91 to
96.
96. So when you look back at that time frame, and then you had some predecessors come after you, I think it was Ujjal Desange and then Glenn Clark, was it? Is that the right order?
Yeah.
Have I got that right?
Well, Glenn Clark, then Ujjal.
And then Ujjal.
Yeah.
Ujjal, okay. When you look at the time in which you were premier, what is something that you're quite proud of that you accomplished in that 5-year period?
Well, I think the land use changes we introduced with the land use planning process, the core process, Commission on Resources and the Environment, where I appointed Stephen Owen to be the commissioner, and we did the 4 hotspot areas of the province where it was getting quite violent, and Port Alberta was at the heart of it.
Yes.
And loggers and environmentalists and Aboriginal people going after each other.
Yeah.
So we did Vancouver Island, and it was hot in the Caribou, Chilcotin, and then the East and West Kootenays. So we set up these citizen people that were environmentalists or loggers or forest companies or city councils could sit down and go through a process and beat up on each other the first bit, and then listen, and then start to understand each other's viewpoint, and then reach an accommodation. And we had expert people facilitating it and guiding them through to a consensus. And within 2 years, we were able to get a consensus for land use plans for Vancouver Island, for the Caribou, Chilcotin, and for the 2 Kootenays. And we changed it to a more smaller scale planning process. The process then led to land use plans throughout the province. And we brought in a whole bunch of other changes at the same time. Big bang theory of change. You know, don't try and dribble it out incrementally and consecutively. Do it all at once. So we brought in a new forest practices code, which was a leader in the world at that time, of changing the way we did our forest practices, of instead of clear cutting big, huge mountainsides and having a road like it did on the west coast of Vancouver Island, Mears Island.
Yeah.
The whole side of the mountain went down.
Yeah.
And ruined salmon spawning streams, and really scarred the landscape badly. We introduced a new forest practices code that brought the cut down, annual allowable cut, and put a number of dollars into transforming the landscape again, repairing the salmon spawning streams and taking out old logging roads and going to smaller clear cuts done differently, and selective logging. And we also introduced a change in the way that we related to First Nations. And I ran on a policy that we were going to recognize Aboriginal title, and we were going to
And that hadn't been done before.
No, 130 years of denial, starting with Trutch, who was the commissioner of the colony of BC and then the province of BC, who said that when BC came into Confederation in 1871, that Aboriginal title was eliminated. And if it wasn't eliminated, then we just weren't going to recognize it. And so people like the Nisga'a in the 1880s had to confront that intransigence and started to say, hey, we haven't surrendered anything. You've just taken it over. And then you've imposed the Indian Act, residential schools, and you're trying to kill off our culture. And First Nations, courageously, the leadership for many decades maintained that, hey, unlike the rest of Canada, you haven't signed treaties with us. And our civilization's been around for 10,000 years. We're not going away, and you've got to recognize our rights and title. And so I campaigned on that, and we won a big majority to introduce that. So I started the treaty process and the BC Treaty Commission, and we had a wonderful ceremony to announce it in the September 1992 at the Squamish Longhouse, with Prime Minister Mulroney was there, and myself, and the Aboriginal leader Joe Mathias, George Watt, Sophie Pierre, Ed John, Miles Richardson.
Wow, that's quite the cast.
We signed the treaty process, and I got a talking stick that I still got in my house.
Do you?
Yeah.
Wow.
They gave Mulroney and I, Brian and I, talking sticks each as a token of their appreciation.
Should have brought it for. It's appropriate to have for today's.
It's a great look. It's a wonderful looking stick. So that was introduced as part of these huge changes, and we brought in for the transition, which was painful. A lot of loggers lost their jobs when we closed down the Franklin, when Mac Below closed down the Franklin division, river division of Mac Below. It cost jobs.
Yeah.
So we brought in the forest renewal and a fund, a $2 billion.
Was it the Community Futures program?
No, that was a federal program.
Okay.
And our program was to retrain forest workers to use their chainsaws and their backhoes to do things differently, to do the repair work, and to move to add value to the dimensional lumber we were cutting, and help diversify the economies and for the 100 forest-based communities around. So we combined all that at once, and it's a lot to absorb.
Yeah.
But I'm proud of it, and we created 500 new park and wilderness areas. We took all the advocates in BC's wish lists, including the Kitlope and the Tatsuchiti, which the Tatsuchiti was became the largest international park and wilderness area in the world, even bigger than Kruger National Park in South Africa.
Is that right?
Mozambique, yeah. So we used as our measuring a famous document put together by a former prime minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland, called Our Common Future, which developed the term sustainable development. And she said that governments around the world should preserve at least 12% of their territory in its natural state. And so we set that as a target. We're at 6%, and we exceeded it. We hit actually 15%.
15?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we added some incredible new park and wilderness areas.
What's your favorite one?
My favorite one is the Tatsuchiti. Matter of fact, I did a river rafting trip with Becky and my son afterwards with the Johnny Mikes, who ran river rafting on the Tatsuchiti. There was a mine that wanted to go in there and build bridges all through the Tatsuchiti, and then do a 600-foot high earthen dam for a mine in the Tatsuchiti just before it met the Utsuk River and St. Elias area, and then build a slurry pipeline through hundreds of miles of wilderness to Washington, to Alaska, to a deep bay in Alaska. And Al Gore just went nuts. He was the vice president, and people in Alaska went crazy. And the advocates of this mine and the mining association at the time turned it into a litmus test. Either you're for mining or you're for a park, and if you're against mining, you're against all mining, and you're evil, right? I mean, that was
narrative.
That was the choice, yeah. So I just decided for the park wilderness area. I got blasted by the mining association at the time, and even though we'd started 8 mines
right
when I was there, and we were very open in helping the mining community and in the business community too. I mean, I said to the business community, we're partners. Hey, we get along just fine. We want free enterprise to be healthy and profitable, and create the wealth we need to then provide the health, education, social services that people want. And I got a very simple request of you, that you just treat your workers fairly, pay your fair share of taxes, don't mess up the environment. We get along just fine.
Well, that's a good policy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like you've accomplished a lot, Mike, in both your tenureship as mayor and premier. Reflecting on your time as premier, there's got to be something that maybe you're not so proud of, or maybe there's another gaffe in a speech or a conversation? Maybe
Well,
not.
it wasn't really a gaffe. It was the shock of a crook amongst the NDP, a guy by the name of Dave Stupich,
Okay.
who had misused $2 million worth of lottery funding, and bingo. It was called Bingo Gate at a headquarters of his society he formed around it in Nanaimo, and with it he purchased an $800,000 house on Gabriola Island, and used it for other private purposes, and there, I had to deal with it when I was in opposition, and it kept coming back as an issue that something's wrong in the Nanaimo Commonwealth Society in Nanaimo. You got to do something about it, and so I had to deal with it. And I got Mo Sahota to address it when we were in opposition, and he went to Brian Smith, who was the Attorney General at the time, and the RCMP investigated, and they came back and said we couldn't find anything. And then when I got into government, there was some more people came forward and said, "Hey, it's you missed this wrongdoing at the Nanaimo Commonwealth Society," and there was a criminal trial about these issues, and the judge oddly didn't find any person, didn't convict a person, but convicted the society and had to pay a fine. And so Dave Stupich didn't get convicted. So I was at a caucus retreat in Prince George, and I heard that news report that Dave was going to pick up all the papers and go shred them, all the papers that the court had, and I thought, oh, we can't, we got to deal with this. So I appointed a forensic auditor to come in and do an investigation, and John Parks, and he did, and he exposed the whole thing, and I was shocked. I mean, I had no idea that it had happened, and had been uproar. I mean, the media.
So you initiated
public.
this investigation,
Yeah.
but ultimately it impacted your career.
Well, I retired. I just said, this is I was getting beat up every day, and my family my parents, my wife, and son,
Yeah.
were really, just suffering huge stress from it.
Yeah.
And so I quietly, a month before I announced my retirement, I made that decision. But I wanted to get things organized properly,
Right.
so that it was dealt with properly. So I asked Elizabeth Cull to change the Societies Act to put greater supervision onto nonprofits and the use of these funds.
Oh.
And I brought in Alan Blakeney, the former Premier of Quebec, to clean up the mess in the NDP. And, and then, with a month later, I announced my retirement.
Okay. And
I thought, at 24 years, I've had enough.
yeah.
Time to get out, do something else.
Yeah. Well, that's a good story. It's nice to hear the other side of the story from what many of us would have heard in the media.
Yeah.
Mike, old growth logging. What's your view on that? Is it still? I believe I understand it's still happening today in a very small scale.
I think some old growth should be logged. Just like we logged the beetle kill forests, and that provided wood for a number of years for some of the sawmills in the interior, in the north. But some of the magnificent old growth forests should be preserved.
Shouldn't it all be preserved?
I don't think all of it should be preserved, because then you're going to close down 100 communities.
Mm.
So I think it's not just using the replanted second generation, in some cases third generation forests we have.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some old growth that, particularly in the interior of the north, that's quite different than the old growth we're talking about around Alberta, your old hometown.
Yeah.
Some of those trees that are, 700 years old and are quite magnificent.
Yeah.
And they're interlaced at the top, and they're hard to log.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of that should be preserved, and I think the government's moving with that balanced approach.
Yeah.
And try to do a transition through it. And I think we'll get there.
Okay.
I think most of the pieces are in place to be able to do that well.
Okay.
And it's usually the people in urban areas that say don't do any old growth cutting, which ironically in Vancouver and Victoria, they're living in two of the largest clear cuts in the province.
Yeah, good point. The irony of it. That's good.
The irony of it used to be all forest.
Right. When you look back at the Expo lands and Van der Zam's deal he made with
Li Ka-shing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that was, like, when you look back now, do you think that was was that a good deal for the province?
No. No, I would have done what we did on the south side of Falls Creek.
Yeah.
Of divide up the Expo lands into smaller packages and allow local developers and architects to bid on them. And there was a local group aside from Li Ka-shing and one other wealthy group of Hong Kong investors that came forward to bid. One of them backed by Grace McCarthy, and Li Ka-shing backed by Van der Zalm.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a group headed by Jack Poole and Jimmy Pattison and others that lost out. And I thought the $500 million with only $50 million down and the $450 million paid back 10 years later was just a horrible financial deal for the province. And the $50 million that Li Ka-shing and his two partners put in, they immediately turned around and developed the site on the with the gaming casino in it.
Yeah.
And sold that, so they had no money into it, and eventually, they've created. I mean, I think Terry Huey and the family have done a terrific job of following the plan that I started with Stanley Kwok in the 80s of developing a terrific community there. I mean, it ended up well, but it was done wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, that's good. That's a good summary. Let's talk about, just as we're getting to wrap up here, Site C Dam. So this was something that actually was on the list of things was one of your files when you became premier, something to entertain.
We did. We turned it down.
Which I think a lot of people would be surprised by. I was surprised when you told me that before we started recording.
Yeah, no, we turned it down. We didn't think we needed it. Matter of fact, Bill Bennett turned it down too.
Is that right?
Yeah, so it's
so Site C Dam has been with us, the concept, for a very long time.
Been around for decades, yeah. And then Christy Clark decided that, along with her commitment to 19 different natural gas, LNG facilities, that she was going to do the Site C Dam and get it built to the point where you couldn't stop it. And I was wary about building the dam across the river there because of the geography and the fact that it's on basically mud. And building a dam on sandstone mud is not a good idea. It's not a very good foundation to build on. So that was my main concern, that where's the geological engineering work that's being done.
And is that your concern today still, Mike?
Still my concern, although they changed the nature of the bridge. Instead of going right across the valley, they've now got a run-of-the-river, basically, facility. And so they've minimized the risk, but even that dam, I'm nervous about. I hope it lasts. They just spent...
Why do you think Christy Clark approved it?
Don't know. Get her on your program and ask. I don't know. I think she wanted to do big, bold projects, and the question marks about the one she picked.
Do you think by the time John Horgan had a chance to look at it and make a decision...
It was too far gone.
It was.
Yeah. And the contracts had been let, and, you know, there was...
It's costing us,
4,000
taxpayers,
workers.
a lot of money.
Oh, a ton of money. A ton of money. And ironically, we now need the 1,100 megawatts that it's going to provide.
Yeah.
But we have other choices, too. We could add to the Columbia, the Revelstoke dam. We can add other generators there, and we've got a lot of wind and solar and other projects that are proceeding now, and sustainability building codes, and you know, so there's a lot of new action underway now. But the government had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in building foundations, putting anchor points 100 feet down into this muck to anchor the dam that's built basically now. So I got my fingers crossed.
Well, so do I, because I got kids who've got to grow up in this province too, and hopefully they're not going to bear too much of that debt, that cost. Mike, how do you compare today's NDP to the one when you were premier? How is it different?
I think it's very similar.
Okay.
I think both John Horgan and Dave Eby are principled pragmatists. I think they've been very clear in laying out a platform, you know, like we did in 1991 with the land use planning and the treaty process, and opening up the government to people, and getting rid of some of the corrupt practices that had gone on. I think John laid out a very clear program, and Dave Eby has and will, and they're doable. I mean, they've priced them out, costed them out, and laid that out along with the changes they're going to make to housing and health care, and dealing with addiction and mental illness, and the cost of living issue that most people are really concerned about. So I think they're in that Western Canadian pragmatic, principled, social democrat tradition.
Okay, good. All right, to wrap this up, I'm going to go through a list of names, and I'm going to list the names, and you can tell me what you think of them, if you want to comment or not.
Sure.
What are your thoughts of Premier David Eby?
I think he's doing a great job. I think he's clear. He's very smart. He listens well, and he's prepared to act. He's prepared to do tough things, like he did in changing ICBC, taking on the trial lawyers, misusing an aspect of ICBC that landed a $700 million extra cost onto ICBC and its rates, dealing with money laundering and the challenges there, and dealing with the housing challenge and the ones we talked about earlier in terms of growth and zoning and what municipalities need to do. I think he's doing a good job.
Okay, great. What are your thoughts on Conservative Party of BC, and maybe even John Rustad, the leader. But there's a big surge in popularity around this party right now.
Yeah, I think it's mostly because of the growing popularity of the federal Conservatives and Belev. I don't know. I've never really talked to John Rustad, so I don't know him very well. I'm concerned about the fringe elements of his party, and I think it's going to come out in the campaign. Some of the candidates they've got are anti-vaxxers, and I've got conspiracy theories and are pretty extreme, almost Trump-like cultists.
Okay. Next up is BC United leader Kevin Falcon.
I know Kevin. I like him. I think he's made a big mistake in changing the name, and
from BC Liberals to
BC United, and then kicking out Rustad from his party, and Rustad then went and formed the Conservative Party and got another caucus member of the then the Liberals and now BC United to join him, the former mayor of Abbotsford. And he's created a monster that's consuming him.
Right.
I mean, I think they've gone from the Liberals have gone from around 22%, tied with the Conservatives, to 12% now. The BC United. And
they're I mean, the polls they're way below the Conservatives, yet they have a ton of MLAs, and
they do. But I think those MLAs should be looking over their shoulder at the Conservatives, or they may split and open up opportunities for the NDP.
Yeah.
So I think Kevin's going to have a difficult time of it in this October 17th election.
Yeah. Do you have any predictions for the outcome of this election this October?
Well, I'm hoping for a healthy majority for the for Dave Eby and the NDP.
Yeah.
But they've listen. They can't take it for granted. I think it's going to be a real fight.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
I don't know him. I've really never met him. I think he has been very clear that he's on to the issue of equality for women. He did that with his cabinet and a number of other measures he's taken in terms of child care and support for women, particularly minority women. And he is into social justice issues. But I think there's two areas that he's challenged. One is recognizing when he's doing something wrong, like try to get the Minister of Justice, Jody Robert-Wilson, to interfere with whether SNC-Lavalin should be criminally charged or not. And his trip to see the Aga Khan and other error judgments, I don't think he recognizes that it's inappropriate behavior, and I think it's harming him. Then I think the not coming to grips with a valid plan to deal with the deficit, some of which was COVID-driven, and some of it with good social programs like Dentacare and pharmacare and child care and the housing and training funds. But I think he's got to do that prudently, the rollout of those programs, and pay down the deficit and the debt before expanding aggressively. So you got to balance that.
Yeah.
So I think there's some areas that
similar to what you spoke about with Tommy Douglas.
Yeah. So I think that's a weakness the Liberals face coming in the next election.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre?
Well, again, I haven't met him. I think he's working on changing his image, and I think it's working to a certain extent. You know, with the new hair and no glasses and casual dressing and being more folksy and instead of
is that important?
I think it is important. I don't think people want angry people all the time. You know, they don't want your politicians to be angry and pouty and, you know. So I think it is working. Now we'll see how he does leading into the campaign, but he's got wind behind his sails with the public now. The real asset that he's got is his wife, who's just a terrific story of an immigrant coming from a poor family and from South America, founding her own business and marrying Poilievre, and
she's quite well spoken.
She's a great speaker.
Yeah, I think she's trilingual or bilingual. I mean,
trilingual, I think.
Yeah.
And she should be running.
Okay, last question for you here, Mike. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh.
I like Jagmeet. I think he's a very genuine, bright.
Have you met him?
Articulate guy, yeah, and
okay.
he's very good, and I think he's doing the best he can. I'm concerned though that he may not have the same resonance in Quebec that Jack Layton or Tom Mulcair had, and it's because of the nature of the Quebec electorate, that they're mostly very French, and like the French in France, they're against anybody wearing religious symbols and mixing state and church.
Sure.
Whether it be a hamilka or a cross or a turban.
Yeah.
And so I
so it kind of goes back to the quiet revolution of the 1960s. I think it was 60s.
Well, I think it's just the back to the original revolution in
right.
1789.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
It's a very part of the French culture.
Are you perplexed as to why Jagmeet Singh has continued to sort of uphold or support this minority government under?
No, it's happened before. I mean, David Lewis did it in 72 to 75, but extracted some major promises from Pierre Trudeau on housing, for example, that led to the nonprofit housing program.
Right. Which they, I guess, the feather in their cap is, say, for example, the dental program, the universal dental program.
You got the dental and pharmacy program.
And pharmacy.
And child care.
Yeah.
And housing. So they've and some labor legislation. And so in that sense, it's been keeping the government going on an agreement. And we'll see whether the NDP federally prospers or doesn't prosper in the election come up in about a year and a half.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, for that.
Yeah.
In 75, the NDP lost a lot of seats when the Trudeau government gained a majority government. So I still don't have a feel, though, for what the outcome is going to be. It looks like it's going to be probably a conservative government, but hey, a year and a half's a long time.
It's a long way, as you would know. Mike, tell me about this book, City Making in Paradise, which I'm now a proud owner of.
Well, it's for you,
Thank
Andrew.
you for this, by the way.
And basically, I wrote it in 2006 with Ken Cameron, and a very good journalist, writer, author, Sean Rossiter, and we wanted to capture what is it that makes Vancouver so unique and so admired around the world for being a livable city. And we talked about it a lot and picked 9 different things, a lot of which Ken was involved in as a senior planner at Metro Vancouver for decades. And it talks about the planning background that was put in place by some brilliant city planners in the 1950s, led by Peter Oberlander, who became the head of the planning school at UBC, and the Lower Mainland plan that was put together from Vancouver to Hope, that was then broken down into regional districts by Dan Campbell, the Socrat Minister of Municipal Affairs in 1967, 68. And so that was the start of laying the framework for the livable region plan that has guided the region for a long time, that Walter Hardwick expanded out from the city to the region, where we preserved green space and agricultural lands and significant ecological areas, 70% of the geography of the region. And the other 30% was to be developed around town centers, linked by public transit rather than freeways, and to create communities that people could live, work, and play in. And so, downtown Vancouver and Metrotown, downtown New Westminster, Surrey, Coquitlam, the North Shore, Richmond, these were town centers that became part of. It's still happening, the livable region.
Yeah, absolutely are. Well, I look forward to reading this on my next break, which is coming up soon. Mr. Harcourt, you've had quite the career. 30th Premier of British Columbia, 34th Mayor of Vancouver, Honourable Stephen Mike Harcourt. Thank you very much for being on Coastal Front today. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I wish you all the best in the future. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. And it was great to be with you and to be interviewed by you and to talk about why we've got such a, I can say it now, fantastic city and province.
We sure do. Yes. Well agree. I much agree. Yeah, thank you very much.